AR has written his book, Atom to Omega, An Anatomy of UFO Phenomena. I have referenced AR so many times on this show. I've read his book from cover to cover, and I absolutely love everything that he writes about. And we've gotten into some very unique conversations because the perspective from which the book was written is so unique. So without any further delay, let's go ahead and get him on the line. Alan, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk and the Fringe Radio Show.
Oh, thank you, Pat, and thank you for having me back.
Oh, well, thank you for being here. Thanks for setting time aside and making time for us on your busy weekend.
What's this about this is the 9th time, I guess, I've been on your show, isn't it? Something like that?
Yeah. You should be to have a chair here, I think. No, it's an honor to have you on all the time, Alan. Gosh, it's been several years ago when we first, of course, we've never met in person, which I need to get to a couple. I would do this program on ufology and paranormal research and all this other fun, fringy stuff. And I've never really been to any events, and I've had several invites by many people. We tried to get an event off the ground here in Utah and had a little bit of difficulty with it, and it's something that we would love to do again because this area for sure needs one. But it's so great to talk to you as always, and all the guests that I've had on. And there is a connection when you can meet somebody face to face. But again, I want to thank you for taking time and being here tonight.
Well, the pleasure's all mine, and perhaps one day I'll get a chance to come out there and meet you personally, maybe do a live interview with you.
That would be great.
Right there.
That would be great. Why don't you give our listeners that have not heard about you before, or a refresher, I should say, a little bit about your background, how you got into writing the book, and what brought you into the world of UFO research. And then your book is so diverse, we can get into all kinds of topics, and I understand you've got a new book coming out. I want to hear about that, but why don't you go ahead and give our listeners a little bit of a background story?
Okay, well, it all started back in 1955 when I was 15 years old. I was a member of the Ground Observer Corps, which, unless you were alive back then, you probably never heard of it. It was an Air Force program. It was designed to reduce the threat of a surprise air attack from the former Soviet Union. And I would go up, man the post on Friday nights, and I had my mother's permission. I'd stay all night. I'd go up around 9 o'clock on a Friday night normally, and I'd stay in usually until after dawn. And I had joined the year earlier when I was only 14 years old. I was the youngest observer on the post, but after about a year of being there, I got very familiar with all the local aircraft flying over the area. And once you spend some time doing that, you get pretty familiar with. I could tell if an aircraft has one or multiple engines, whether it's jet or prop driven. But during the spring of 1955, they were building a new Air Force base at the south end of town. And right about that time, a lot of local people started reporting seeing very strange things in the sky. And I think a lot of it was just misidentified local or conventional aircraft, maybe meteors or even the planet Venus. But there were a lot of reports that were just unexplainable. And there were two people that came up during that time from the local radio station. Art Pierce, who was the news director of the station, Jim Roddy was the news director of the station, and Art Pierce was the newscaster. And when they came up quite often on Friday nights, we got to know each other pretty well. One night when they came up during my shift, they spotted something that it just didn't act like a conventional aircraft would act, the way it maneuvered around in the sky, and then it dropped down and disappeared into the glow of the construction lights where they were laying the runways at this new base. Mm-hmm. Now, I didn't see it. I was on the phone calling in a routine aircraft report to our filter center, which was down in Albany, New York. And when I got off the phone, they were all excited. They were really adamant. I thought they were just kidding around at first, but I saw they were really serious. Something went down over by the base, and they wanted to go and check it out. Since we'd gotten to know each other pretty well, they invited me to go along with them. And I think, well, they had my curiosity really peaked. So I said, well, okay, I'll put the post out of operation for a while. And I went with him. The nearest we could get to the area was this dirt road that they had cut through the woods, which would skirt the north perimeter of this base, right where the runways would begin, or the main runway would begin. And right now it's just a dirt road in the woods full of muddy ruts. And we came to a clearing where they apparently had used to park some of the construction of equipment, and we got out. And we didn't know exactly where we were in relation to where they saw this light come down, and the observation post, which our observation post was actually at the highest point in the city. It's on the roof of Physicians Hospital. It's up in Plattsburgh, New York. So Jim says, well, I'm going to get on the roof of the car, see if I can look over the trees, spot a local city light, give us an idea just about where we are. So he climbed up on the top of the car, but the trees were too high. He couldn't see anything. So he got down. He says, well, we'll go down the road just a little bit farther. If we don't see anything, then we'll turn around and go back.
Right.
Well, just as we were ready to get in the car, all three of us looked up at the same time. Right over our heads was this huge, white, oval-shaped, glowing object. And it was just silently, not a sound, silently drifted over our heads and disappeared over the trees on the other side of the this clearing where we were. And it just, Jim said, did you see that? And we all said, yeah. But the thing is, we couldn't turn around and go back down the road and chase it because the roads were just too rough, and Jim could only drive about maybe 5-10 miles an hour without damaging the car. And then we ended up going back to the post, and this sighting bothered me for 33 years actually. And finally, it was 1989. I decided, well, I'm going to see if I can do some research on this stuff and maybe figure out what it was we saw that night. And I never realized, how involved everything was. And I figured, a couple of weeks I should probably have a pretty good idea of what it was we saw. But once I got into the research, my God, I spent the next 23 years analyzing all kinds of information, and it led down many different kinds of roads, archaeology, science, astronomy, ancient civilizations. So there was a lot of biblical issues that came up. And that kind of inspired me towards the end to write From Adam to Omega. And until that point, it was the last 2 years, I couldn't buy. I had a hard time digesting what that information suggested. And what it was suggesting was that extraterrestrials were somehow involved with the evolution of the human race. But I spent the last 2 years just going back over everything, trying to find alternative meanings to all of this information. And because I looked at it from just a logical perspective, I put aside all allusions to UFOs, religion, God. I looked at everything just from a logical point of view to see, where the chips would fall, and everything pointed back to what that information originally suggested. And that's when I decided to put it all into book form, and then out came From Adam to Omega. So that's how I got interested in the subject. Now, I'm not, all through the book, I present a lot of evidence that suggests this or that, and I state throughout the book, evidence does not necessarily constitute proof.
Right.
So, I leave it up to the reader to, form their own opinions and conclusions based on the merits of the evidence. Let them decide for themselves.
All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Tonight, our guest for the first 2 hours is Alan Roberts. And before I continue on, I would like to take a moment and thank Tina at KCOR Digital Radio Network out of Las Vegas, Nevada. Tina has so graciously picked up Fringe Radio, and she's worked with us. We had a few issues over the past couple of weeks, and she held in there with us. And again, it's an honor to be on their network. They are streaming us live tonight at KCORradio.com. So I want to say good evening to all of our listeners that are listening to us on KCOR Digital Radio Network out of Las Vegas, Nevada. Alan, back to you. So we were talking right before the break about this sighting, and of course you saw this big thing hovering overhead. You wrote the book, and the book is just so intriguing because, again, like you said, it's a good taken off point, if you will. It just opens up so many different doorways and hallways.
Well, that's what I tried to do. I tried to cover almost every aspect that's involved with the UFO phenomenon, and I tried, to distinguish what was fact and what was fiction. The credible from the incredible, and I presented a few opinions, but I drew no conclusions. I said, everything is basically a theory, and that's what I'm presenting. And the same goes with this new book, the one I'm coming out with. That should be out hopefully within the next 2-3 months. And it's called UFOs, What is the Government Really Covering Up? So this time I've kind of focused more or less on one issue rather than try to explain a whole bunch of them. And there's so much information leading to what it is the government is covering up and why they are covering up. And I've got 20 chapters in this book. It's not going to be as quite as thick as the last one. The last one was like 522 pages, but this one I'm assuming when they break it down is probably going to be around 360, 350, 60, somewhere around in there. But I've done a lot of research on it. And some of the research I've updated some points from the first book. New information that's come out on some of those points. So. And I think it's pretty interesting. The publisher's really interested in this, the way I've got it. They've made a few recommendations for strengthening up some kind of the weak points that I had there, which I've been doing for the past week. So hopefully I'll get it all back to them next week. And it's, I don't know, there's some of it sounds a little fantastic. And I state, some of this information is not 100% credible, and it could very well be disinformation. But there are other elements of some factual information that kind of give credence to some of this questionable information. So, again, I'm trying to connect all the dots, put everything together, and come up with reasonable ideas of what's really going on and why the government is, what it is that the government's covering up and why they're doing so. And, for example, some of it has to do with the Eisenhower's alleged contacts with extraterrestrials that he had back in the 1950s. I think a lot of that, from what I gather, from what I've studied, connecting all the dots, it seems like some of that is total disinformation. And disinformation, basically is false information salted with some of the truth. So it's kind of, I've presented it all, and or I'm presenting it all, and kind of pointing out the weak points to it and what may be fact. And I don't know if anybody remembers back in 1952, the Washington invasion, or UFOs invaded Washington, D.C., and they were picked up by radar at Andrews Air Force Base and Washington National Airport. And they invaded the restricted airspace over the Capitol building and the White House. And this happened on 2 consecutive weekends in July. And when Air Force jets were dispatched to investigate, the minute they arrived in the D.C. area, all these UFOs took off. So the jets returned to their base. As soon as they got back to their base, the UFOs came back to Washington, and the jets were dispatched again. They were scrambled again, and as soon as they got back to D.C., the jets of the UFOs took off, and this is how it went. It was like they were playing a game of cat and mouse, except one time they didn't leave the area so quickly when the jets arrived, and one of the pilots, interceptor pilots, got a little nervous when a bunch of them kind of encircled his plane for a short period before they took off. again, they tried to explain it as all kinds of crazy temperature inversions and all of that. But when it's picked up on radar and sighted visually, it's not temperature inversions. And the thing is, it couldn't have picked a more opportune time to do it, because supposedly it was Bolling Air Force Base, which is located in the southeast quadrant of Washington, D.C. It's the nearest base to the White House, and supposedly that's where the jets came. The runways at Bolling were closed down for runway repairs, and their jets had been moved to an air base over in Delaware. So, what an opportune time. These UFOs came in and took advantage of the situation when D.C. had to rely on jets coming from a base much farther away.
Right.
But there's a book by Kevin Randall, and I don't know if it was a misprint or if he's telling the truth or what, but according to his information, it was the runways over at Andrews Air Force Base that were being repaired. And if that were the case, these jets from Bolling would have been there, and they could have responded almost immediately. But that seems not to have been the case. So I don't know. All the original information said it was Bolling Air Force Base that was closed down. So, and the thing is, they couldn't have picked a more opportune time to pull this little stunt. But why did they do it? As I was doing all this research from Atom to Omega, a lot of it suggested there had been contact established at some point in time between the government and these extraterrestrial beings, these pilots of these UFOs, and it seemed like it may have happened soon after this D.C. incident, but of course there's no way to prove that. But it's just that this happened during the Truman administration, and supposedly this was like just a few years after the Roswell incident, and supposedly Truman had established a panel to deal with the situation, made up of high-ranking military officials, scientists, and intelligence people, and of course that project has been referred to as MJ-12 or the Majestic 12, and or MAGIC, M-A-J-I-C.
Right. Yep.
But if contact was established, if this group really existed, they surely would have been involved with it. But there's no indication that Truman himself was ever personally involved. In fact, there's a lot of rumors that Eisenhower, who was president-elect at the time, once he became president, had one or two meetings with aliens. Now, again, this is subject to... it all depends on how you want to interpret the information, and I suspect a lot of it is disinformation. Supposedly, the Majestic 12, the MJ-12 documents, they came out around 1984, I believe, and they did a brief description on the Roswell crash, and they claimed that bodies were found a mile or two away from the crash site and badly decomposed and partially eaten by predators. But I think a lot of that is disinformation, because I've provided new information in the book that's coming out that suggests that the crash itself, the bodies were recovered from this crash, but it didn't happen up in Corona, which is 75 miles.
Isn't there some theories, too, Alan, that possibly the two craft, the Roswell craft and another crash site, I don't know if that was the Aztec site, there was a potential that these two craft might have hit each other?
Well, that's what they said, because it was a very large storm, a very bad thunderstorm, electrical storm that night, and apparently the ranch foreman up in Corona on the Foster Ranch up there,
right,
he went out in the morning and discovered this swath of debris about a mile in length and maybe 300 feet wide or something like that on the ranch. And it was a few days later that he took it to Roswell, to the Chavez County Sheriff's Department, and Sheriff George Wilcox, he figured, Jesus, it looked kind of strange, so he notified the authorities over at Roswell Army Airfield, and they sent over Major Jesse Marcel, who was a base intelligence officer, and Sheridan Cavett, who was an agent in the Counterintelligence Corps. And they agreed, when they got to the sheriff's office, they inspected it, and they agreed it warranted further investigation. So they followed Brazel back to the ranch, and it was late when they got back, so they had to spend the night. And Brazel took them out to the debris site in the morning, and they spent most of the day out there looking at this stuff. And then they loaded what they could into their vehicles and headed back to Roswell, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning when they got back, and Marcel had a suspicion that it had something to do with a flying saucer, so he took it home and showed it to his family before he took it to the base. He woke up his wife and son. He had it all spread out on the kitchen floor. His son, the late Jesse Marcel Jr., he distinctly remembers handling this piece like an I-beam that had strange symbols on it. It kind of looked like it might have been Egyptian hieroglyphics, but he says it wasn't Egyptian or any writing that he could identify. So anyway, when Marcel took it back to the base, Colonel Blanchard, the base commander, he had Walter Hott, the base information officer, prepare a press release stating that a flying saucer crashed on a nearby ranch and had been retrieved and brought to the base. But I have information now that Walter Hott, before he died, he left a notified statement to be opened by his family after his death, in which he revealed a lot of stuff in there. And he said there were 2 crash sites, one at the Foster Ranch, where apparently something bounced off the ground. All the information, other information I read suggests there was a burned-out gouge on the ground where something had bounced off the ground and probably shed some debris further on down in another field. But then the craft came back down just about maybe 35, 40 miles north of Roswell. And that's where the craft and the bodies were found. And the Roswell Fire Department had responded to that site, too. So, and they... Frankie Rowe was the daughter of a lieutenant in the fire department. She went to the station that day after they got back, and she saw the men playing with this what they call memory metal. It looked like a piece of tinfoil. They crumpled it up, and when they put it on a table, she picked it up, crumpled it up in her hand, and when she opened her hand, it unfolded to its original smooth shape with no signs that it had ever been creased. And then later that day, she said that military people came to her home, threatened her and her family, made death threats if she ever revealed anything about what she saw. And she wasn't the only person that was threatened. I mean, Sheriff Wilcox, you can ask his daughter and his granddaughter. They were threatened with death if they ever said anything. The local radio station out there, the newscaster and the general manager each received a call from apparently some colonel from the Pentagon threatening to pull the story immediately or they'd revoke the station's license. I mean, if this was a weather balloon like they originally said, why would they make death threats to a 12-year-old girl and her family over a balloon? And why would they threaten the sheriff and his family with death threats over a balloon? Or why would they threaten to revoke a radio station's license over a balloon? So obviously they were covering something up, and it wasn't a balloon. So
it didn't even necessarily have to be a out-of-this-world flying saucer. I'm not, taking aside from the story, I mean, it could have been anything. Could have been some sort of new weapon that they were going to fire. Who knows? All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight is Alan Roberts. Again, Alan, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening on your busy Saturday night.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine, Pat.
Let's go ahead and pick up some calls, okay?
Okay.
All right. Caller, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk. You're on with A.R. Roberts.
Yes. Good evening, sirs. This, it seems to be that most of these sightings and all this stuff just happen to be after the most consequential advance in rocketry and traveling faster than the speed of sound and all this stuff, And so, why isn't this happening today?
You mean as far as sightings go?
Well, yeah, like sightings. I mean, you have, I've seen the videos of, these people with their discs, and all these various shaped flying saucers, and here and there and everywhere. Back in the 50s or in the 60s when I grew up, and now there isn't that. Why?
Well, I think when you look at it, if you've done any real serious research on it, the sightings, they go back for hundreds of years, in fact, thousands of years. You've got cave paintings, cave drawings of what looks like two astronauts in spacesuits over in Val Camonica, Italy, from 10,000 B.C., whether they're astronauts or not, we don't know what inspired these ancient people to create these images, whether they were drawing astronauts or some leaders of some ancient clan dressed in their ceremonial tribal get-up. I mean, that's a matter of interpretation. But there's so much of it all over the world. And then you get into the medieval period, the Renaissance period, where you've got a lot of these paintings, both religious and non-religious, with strange aerial objects in the skies. I mean, what were the...
I'm sorry, aren't they more meteors and meteorites, and they want to put like the chariots of fire on a meteor,
Well, I think these chariots of fire that you're probably meteors. I mean, they're only in view for just a couple of seconds before they burn out. But these cave drawings, for example, these petroglyphs, these people would not record something that of such a mundane thing. They recorded, if you look at some of these petroglyphs, I mean, they recorded the animals, and almost some of them were very, very well depicted. And they saw them every day. They hunted them for food. They hunted them for clothing. They knew what they looked like, and they recorded pictures of them on cave walls, and along with other things that they felt were important in their lives. And what these oval and disc shapes represent in their ancient artwork it's a matter of interpretation. But obviously, it was something that they saw. They drew what looked like what they saw, and then even in modern times, if you look at modern times, right around the time of the Roswell crash, all of a sudden that woke everybody up, and now everybody started looking into the sky, and they started seeing things. Now, granted, a lot of that was probably misidentified aircraft, meteors, or whatnot, and the videos and photos that are available.
I mean, the generic term UFOs, unidentified flying object, and there is a question put out there all the time. Do you believe in UFOs? Well, yes, I do. Unidentified, and they were flying, and all these things. But UFOs, and where are they today? I mean, okay, there is about 2 or 3
being reported
weeks ago,
every day. You don't hear so much about it in the United States anymore, but over in Europe and Asia, they're all over the world. They're being reported every day.
Okay, where is this? About 3, maybe 4 weeks ago, on these, I was watching the news, and all these news lines that go, that ramble, just below the screen there, and it said there was, they had some sort of contact with something from outer space, or signals or something like that. Have you heard anything about that?
No, I can't say I have.
I've seen, there's a lot of propaganda stuff floating around out there. You know, a lot of hoaxers move stuff around.
But this was, it was so short, you know, and it ran, you know, they ran it only one time, but it said contact from, well, not contact, but signals from, you know, out of there or wherever out of there is, you know, that came in and you know, and that's all it said. So, you know, I don't know. And as far as I'm concerned, we better be very careful because if they can come here and if they are predatory and all these things, we better be careful.
Well, and that's what Stephen Hawking even mentioned, is that we better be careful who we invite, and I somewhat agree with that.
Yeah, and what would you do? What would you know, if there was a signal from outer space, you know, all our computers and all our scientists could not decipher it, but here it comes, you know, the message comes in, boom, boom, boom. It has to be from outer space, it has to be from intelligent individuals. We cannot decipher it. We cannot do that. So if you were president, would you make up all kinds of balloons and wonderful welcoming things, or would you decide to put the money in defense of this planet?
Well, I think the government would keep everything a secret.
Yeah, but what would you do?
This is what I'm bringing out of my...
Would you prepare a welcome with balloons, or would you prepare a welcome with laser beams?
Not unless I knew they were friendly would I prepare a welcome.
What would you do? I mean, we don't know. In all these messages,
I
we don't know. What would you do, sir?
Well, first of all the evidence points to the fact that there's more than one extraterrestrial race involved.
Okay,
it's not just one race, it's several.
That's not what I'm asking. I am asking you for what we know right now. Would you make the balloons or the missiles?
Well, I don't think they would do anything at the moment. For the information that I have, the government already knows what's going on, and they have known for quite a while. And the only reason they can't keep it, they have to keep it secret, is because
we are wasting our money on terrestrial wars and killing, you know, various people here and there, and we're not investing in spatial technology.
Well, there's a lot of information that suggests we're far ahead of the game.
Well, like what?
Been kept secret from the public.
Like for me, a defensive position would be on our moon. A defensive position would be on, you know, on Mars. You know what?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of reasons why we haven't gone back to the moon.
True.
But right now, our space activities are just limited to Earth orbit.
Yeah.
But,
hey, I've got a couple other ones stacked up here. I'm going to go ahead and let you go and get on to the next caller, but thanks for calling in.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Interesting questions, Alan. Interesting questions.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let's take the next caller. Caller, good evening. Welcome to K-Talk. You're on with A.R. Roberts.
Good evening, Pat. It's Bill in New York, and hello, Alan. How are you tonight?
I'm fine, sir. How you doing?
Doing very well. And just before I ask you a couple of questions, I just got to make a comment. Yes, unidentified objects are seen daily. I'm a sky watcher in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley near Pine Bush. And Pat can tell you, I've captured stuff with my night vision cameras, and I have an object that curves from upward, downward, and then it stops very briefly, illuminates three lights, which I believe is propulsion, and then it takes off like warp speed. And that's pretty much the description I can tell you, and Pat can verify what I'm telling you. But I have a question for you. You spoke about Roswell, and I'm curious if you've done any research on the Mexican Roswell incident, where supposedly the United States went over in some type of black ops mission and recovered from the Mexican soldiers. They had it on a flatbed or whatever it may be. It was a wreckage site, and they went in there and they took the wreckage, and what was left were a bunch of dead bodies of Army Mexican army
Mexican,
soldiers.
Yeah, the Mexican soldiers. Yeah, was it Colima? I forgot
think
the name.
Is it Presidio?
No, it was the name of the town.
Oh, okay.
Colima, or I forgot the name.
Something
of it.
like that. Yes, it was. I think in the 70s.
I don't know any more about that than you do. Only what has been reported in some documentaries, but I haven't. I was so busy with other things in the book that I never got a chance to really research that particular incident. But from what I gather, the United States and the intelligence in the United States tracked this thing come down and hit an airplane over there.
Yes.
And they found wreckage of the plane, and supposedly these Mexican soldiers they found the disc that crashed. It wasn't too damaged from what the reports say, but and I guess there were bodies inside. But something happened, whether it was some kind of I don't know, maybe atmosphere leaking out from this thing that affected everybody, killed everybody, or some kind of a disease that was released from the craft that apparently killed all these Mexican soldiers, and then the government sent in their own forces with helicopters to retrieve the thing. But that's about all you ever heard of it. What happened to it, where it went, who knows? You know, most likely, if any place, it went to the Wright-Patterson Field in Dayton, Ohio, the Foreign Technology Division, where they deal with everything, any technology that's foreign to the United States, and that would include anything extraterrestrial as well.
I agree.
But, you know, that's so sewed up in secrecy over there. You know?
Now, Alan, do you think that because we all know about Area 51, Groom Lake, etc., S4, but do you think that it's been relocated, which I think it has been because it's been on the map so much, it's been spoken about so much? Do you think it's in a new location, maybe Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah or some other remote location where they're doing this type of research again?
Yeah, I think Dugway is a very good possibility. Although Area 51, I don't think Area 51 itself was involved with anything other than experimental, advanced experimental craft. I think this S4 site that Bob Lazar brought into everyone's attention is probably the best place where they'd be doing any research on or back engineering on alien spacecraft, because it's about 10-15 miles southwest of Area 51, completely out of view, concealed by surrounding mountains, and it's built into a mountain. The only thing that they have, well, from what Lazar explained, is 9 hangars, but the hangar doors are all camouflaged to blend with the base of the mountain. So, if what he says is true.
And also with the Element 115, Alan, when he spoke about it, then a few years later, you hear it's made public. Now, a lot of people could say what they want about Bob Lazar. I think personally, I believe the man. That's just my own personal opinion. I think they wanted somebody that could think outside the box. No one was getting things done the way they were doing it, the routine they had with the scientists they had, and they needed somebody to look at it objectively from, like I said, outside the box, looking at it in a different perspective. And that's why I think they brought Bob in to look at this and see what he thought about it, and if he could figure out exactly what the mechanisms and how the source of the power source worked, whatever what he was looking at. But
the information I'm bringing out in my new book, I'm presenting a lot of evidence suggesting he may be part of a disinformation campaign. There's a lot of credible and a lot of things that are questionable about his story, but there's a lot of things that are credible. For instance, his educational background. I mean, he claims he has a master's degree in physics from MIT and one in a degree in electronics from Caltech, but nobody has ever, when they checked on his references there's no record of him ever attending either of these universities. Now, and his picture does not appear in any of the yearbooks. That's possible. He could have stayed home on the day they were taken, but the thing is, he can't remember or refuses to indulge the name of any of his professors, and that to me is suspicious. He got an education somewhere. He's very well educated, so he's either a crackpot that put one over on a lot of people, or he's telling the truth, or he's part of a disinformation campaign. Now, if he is part of a disinformation program that I suspect, I can't say for sure, it's just something I suspect, he very well may have attended MIT and Caltech under a different name. Now, the CIA provides people in the witness protection program.
Bill, do you want to pick up?
Yes. Hey, I have one. Alan, I have one final question for you, and this has to do with what's going on recently with the speculation about if Hillary became our next president, if she may look into, the classified documents as far as UFO related, and also what John Podesta's been speaking of as far as disclosure. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think this is just talk, or do you think that we're ever going to see disclosure in the near future?
Well, I think we'll have disclosure, but I don't think it's going to be maybe for another, probably at least a century, because I think a lot of it has to do with religious issues. And if the government were to release what they know about what was going on during the biblical era, I think that would be the most devastating thing they could release, because it would blow religions out of the water all over the world. And you've got classified aircraft, experimental aircraft. You got all kinds of things that they could be disclosing. Maybe we learned the secret of free energy from aliens or whatever. I mean, a lot of these things would warrant being classified and being kept secret. But I think the most devastating one, when you look at all the information, the one that would cause the most problems would be the religious issues. That's what I think. As far as Hillary releasing anything, I doubt it. Everybody, Carter was going to do it. Clinton was going to do it. Whether they know anything or not, I don't know. I think once the Majestic 12 group was formed, they were there permanently, even though, when they die off, somebody would take their place, or if they retired, somebody would take their place. But presidents come and go all the time, and I think it's at the discretion of this secret group to determine what they would tell to whatever president they felt was worth telling it to. I think, it's at their discretion what they choose to tell and who they choose to tell it to. So I don't know. If Hillary goes in, I don't know. I kind of doubt that she would reveal anything. I think even most of the presidents have never been told. But again, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. I don't think it'll ever come out from as far as the government. It's a Pandora's box. It would be almost an admission of everything that was said was a lie, and then every other type of conspiracy will also be blown out of proportion in regards to everything that we also speculate that could be been covered up. With assassinations, etc., plots. But as far as the religious, Pope Francis is a progressive, and he has embraced the possibility of, having this encounter or the acceptance of extraterrestrials, their existence of. Now, do you think, because I also am one to believe that they're hiding in the Vatican vaults evidence.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mentioned that in my new book, too.
Oh, cool. So where can we find the book? Where can I find your book?
Well, the one I'm working on now, UFOs. What is it? The government is really hiding. It's not out yet. It'll probably be out in the next, I'm guessing, maybe 2 to 3 months. But from Adam to Omega, I covered some of it from Adam to Omega, but not to the extent that I'm covering it in this book. But what you were talking about, Bob Lazar. Before the break there, I had a couple of things I wanted to mention about that. Sure. Okay. He told John Lear and a few friends, when he knew what they would be testing this craft he was working on Wednesday nights. And he said they always, they took it just above the tops of the mountains, but never any higher. It didn't go out into space or anything like that. And he took some people out there. He broke a security oath when he took people out into the desert to witness these test flights. And John Lear, His father founded the Lear Jet Corporation. It was one of the people he took out there. And Lear attests to the fact that he saw this test flight and back in 1989, and it appeared at the exact time that Lazar said it would appear. So how did Lazar know about the scheduling of these test flights unless he was telling the truth? And now, when he was caught, he got a little complacent there and think he could just keep getting away with this. But when he was caught, it was on public land, outside the boundary of any restricted military facility. But why would they be? Why would armed security personnel confront them out on public land unless they were suspicious of his activities and they were following him? And why would they be following him? Unless they suspected he was a security risk. And why would he be a security risk unless he was involved with something highly classified? So there's a lot of things in his credibility. In his 1989, all his records had disappeared, were erased, which is very possible they erased any information regarding his educational background too. But the only proof he had for his employment in 1989 was his W-2 form showing the Department of Naval Intelligence, for which no information can be found on the internet on this department. But obviously does exist since it was a source of his paycheck. Now, somebody recently told me, well, maybe there's an Office of Naval Intelligence, but they said maybe the department was changed, just changed the name to the Office of Naval Intelligence. But I kind of doubt that, because I think check back on the Office of Naval Intelligence. It was formed back in the 18 something or other. So it was already in existence, long before this. So
you know something too, Alan, because I know he's coming up to a break soon. But I remember, if I remember correctly, George Knapp had interviewed numerous people, multiple individuals, witnesses that corroborated Bob Lazar's story. But then when he went back to speak with them, a lot of them refused to speak. It's like if someone went and approached them and silenced them, maybe threatened them from coming forward with any information to back up Bob Lazar's story.
Yeah, and Knapp, he investigated Lazar's claim that he worked over at Los Alamos National Laboratory. But when they call Los Alamos, I had no record of him ever worked there, that he never worked there. But he did. His name is in the phone directory. His extension phone number is in the phone directory from the time that he did work there. So, and George Knapp, he did contact a few people that worked with him over there that vouched. They had worked with him on classified projects. But the thing is, Lazar was not employed by Los Alamos National Laboratory. He was employed by a contractor who was doing work there. So it all depends on how they spin this information, the way it appears. So it's crazy. And a lot of the things that he claimed, if he is a part of a disinformation campaign that I really suspect he may be, he disclosed a lot of stuff, a lot of information. But if it is disinformation, some of it's true and some of it's false. So you got to figure out what part is true and what part is not true.
You got to mix all the ingredients of the cake up. All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio. Our guest tonight for the first 2 hours that's gone way too fast is Alan Roberts. Again, Alan, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure, Pat.
You mentioned, and we talked a little bit about this before, but you mentioned about the religious implications. Do you think that that would really cause mass panic in today's society?
Yes, I do. Religion, plays a very important part of most people's lives today. Mm-hmm. And if they were to discover what was going on with alien activity in biblical times, and I go into quite a bit of detail in this and from Adam to Omega, if that information were released, which I'm sure the government is probably well aware of, and maybe even the Vatican, but they're keeping it quiet. If that information were to be released, yeah, it would. You know how fanatic some people are about their religious beliefs. In fact, most of the problems in the world today are based on religious differences. One ethnic or religious group claiming superiority over another. I mean, and look at the world problems, the way things are today, and a lot of it is based on religion. And I think, worldwide, that would, if they were to release this information today, it would be devastating. It has to be done gradually, and I think that's what a lot of this disinformation is. It's kind of desensitizing the people to the issues. I mean, it involves all kinds of things. I mean, very good, credible evidence, even the wild claims of the fringe element. But people are getting a good education. People are keeping up with it. Are getting a good education on all facets of the phenomenon. But the majority of the people, all they know about UFOs is what they read in biased media coverage, or from the tabloids, and the tabloids are not the most credible source of credible information.
Right.
And if the truth were to come out, it's something that a lot of people have never really delved into, except serious UFO researchers. But and there's just so much involved with the biblical issues. I think that would, when you compare it to all the other possibilities for government secrecy, I think that would be the most devastating. I mean, look at when the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird, when that information came out, there was no mass panic over that, or later on when the stealth aircraft, the B-2 bomber and the F-17 stealth fighter, when that information came out, nobody ran around in the streets and oh my God, it's just that. And when you look at all the other possibilities that would have to that could justify secrecy, if any of that was revealed, it wouldn't cause as much of a problem worldwide. I think the religious issues would, and that's what I trying to bring out in this book here. But
well, and the other thing too is, one problem I think that as far as government disclosure goes, and I've said this many times in the past, I think where the problem you'll have, Alan, is it's going to be the deception. Let's just say tomorrow, for whatever reason, the current administration came out and said, okay, look, here's all the Roswell documents, here's the pictures of the bodies, here's the real thing. Here's what really happened. Now, of course, it would be a shocker, and I believe I also agree with you with the religious implications. But I think the bigger shocker is going to be where people feel, because there are a lot of people that do trust the government. There are people that they take it as law. They don't question anything. And now to come out and have a government agency and to say, well, since 47 we've been lying. We lied because to protect your best interests and our best interests, but it's that whole deception thing. That's going to be a hard pill for a lot of people to swallow.
Sure. Well, look at the claims of Gary McKinnon. Are you familiar with Gary McKinnon?
Yes.
A lot of people have probably never heard of Gary McKinnon. All they know is if they happen to catch a very brief announcement or a news item that he hacked into government computers and it was a federal crime and blah, blah, blah. But, that information was very short-lived, and it was so brief. And I don't think if they had ever mentioned anything about his reasons for doing so, that would have opened a can of worms for the government, because if he was put on trial and all that information came out, I mean, that would reveal a major NASA and government cover-up. I mean, for anybody that maybe doesn't know about Gary McKinnon, he's a computer systems analyst over in the United Kingdom. And he hacked into government computers back in 2000 and 2001. He was arrested by the high-tech crime unit over in the United Kingdom, but he hadn't broken any laws over there, so they released him. But apparently the U.S. government wanted to extradite him to put him on trial over here, but the British wouldn't allow the extradition because he suffers from Asperger's syndrome, and they said,
right,
if he was incarcerated, that might result in him committing suicide. So, but I don't think, I have a strong suspicion that the U.S. government really had no intentions of extraditing him, because if he was put on trial over here, like I say, it would have opened a can of worms for the government. And maybe 10 years later, they dropped all charges against him. Maybe it was just because they couldn't extradite him, or maybe it was because they were just putting up a big front to make it appear that they wanted to extradite him. But what appeared on the news about him was so short-lived, and it's one of those news items, most people wouldn't even pay attention to, and if they did, they forget about it very quickly. But it's the claims that he made, what he discovered in his hacking, that's amazing, and I think that's probably what they want to keep secret. He claimed that he hacked into a computer over at Building 8 at the Johnson Space Center, and he found photos of taken in space, NASA's secret UFO photos that were taken in space. In one file, and in another file, they had the same photos with the UFOs airbrushed out. Why would they airbrush them out? I mean, those are the pictures that, if any of them got into the newspapers, it would have been those. But the main thing is what he discovered. He said the United States government is working with anti-gravity technology with aliens, and they're doing it out in orbit with a space fleet we've designed called Solar Warden. Now, what if that's true? If that was ever to be revealed, that would cause a lot of problems with the public, because that would be telling the public that we have the technology that could have prevented the deaths of those astronauts that were killed in the shuttle disasters, the Columbia and the what was the other one there? I forgot
Challenger.
The name of it offhand. Challenger, yeah. If we had that kind of technology that could have prevented those things, so they definitely, that's one reason they wouldn't want to release that information, because why would we keep all that technology secret if we could have we could be using it now? But back in the early '60s, when I was a musician, I worked in a music store for a couple of years, and my boss had a friend. He popped in maybe once or twice a year, and I had the pleasure of meeting him, and he apparently worked for the government on very highly classified projects. And one day when he was there, we got into a discussion. We're talking about that the Russian Sputnik, the first satellite that the Russians put into space, and the conversation progressed to what we're developing our own space technology. And he floored me with what he said. He said, we have technology today that's so advanced, people would just not believe it. It's far advanced than anything that you read in science fiction stories or see in any science fiction movies. And, I had no reason to doubt what he was saying at the time. And, if what he said is true, which I doubt, now I'm beginning to wonder, did he work at this still secret Area 51 back then when nobody knew about it, or maybe S4 site that, Bob Lazar claims? And if any of that is true, what kind of technology have we developed since that time, since back in the 60s? So that makes me wonder, Jesus, is it possible that any of these claims by Gary McKinnon is true? McKinnon says he opened a file that showed listing non-terrestrial people working, non-terrestrial employees, whether they were Air Force, Navy, or Army. He was unable to tell, but he said he opened another file that listed ship-to-ship and fleet-to-fleet transfers. And if that's true, I mean, there's a lot of spacecraft up there. But where did all this come from? And there's a lot of it. Some researchers suspect that it may be an offshoot of Ronald Reagan's SDI program, Space Defense Initiative, that started back around in the 80s. And it's hard to believe that we would have come up with anything that early on. But if what this fellow that I talked to said is true, I mean, it's very, very possible that we had already gleaned a lot of information from alien technology back then. And then you got Reagan's statement to the United Nations speech he made. I think it was in 1983, where he says, "I think I have it here. Yeah, here it is." He says, "I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?" Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a very cryptic statement. It almost sounds like he was reminding the dignitaries that he was addressing about something they already knew. Yeah. Like aliens and humans working together in secret underground bases and even in space. I mean, and was his mention of an alien threat referring to the hostile factor in the alien? I mean, there is a hostile factor in there. How they relate to the other aliens is who knows, but it's just so many things. And then there's a reference he made in his diary that I'll see if I can find it here. I guess he had a meeting with 5 of the top space scientists, and the entry he made was, he said, it was just unbelievable. He says what he learned from these guys, because it sounds like science fiction, but it's real. He said, I learned that we have the capability of orbiting 300. Our shuttle capacity is capable of orbiting 300 people. 300 people. I mean, geez, what could? Is he referring to one of these huge triangular-shaped craft that is being reported all over the world, especially around U.S. military installations, or is he referring to maybe one of these large cigar-shaped craft that he says is stationed in orbit? I think McKinnon said there was like 7 or 8 of these long cigar-shaped craft that are like the size of the length of 2 football fields. And there's like 43 smaller craft. So I try to connect all the dots. I take all the information, I try to connect all the dots and see what it suggests. And if this is all true, I mean, is it very possible that Eisenhower did meet with aliens back in the 1950s? I mean, there's several stories about that. There's 2 or 3 of them that just there's variations on a couple of them, but it seems it just doesn't seem credible. But then there's on the UFO TV network there's a site there that put out a very, very credible documentary. And the fellows that did this, they claimed that they interviewed, they provided names, dates, and the ranks of these people in government and military that they interviewed. that suggests Eisenhower very possibly did meet with aliens. But it disputes some of the other information that came out, and some of the other stories. But then you put that all together, it could all be disinformation. Some of it may be true, and some of it not. So I mean, this is something that's been going on since back in Roswell. A lot of disinformation. We're being pelted with all kinds of crazy ideas, but some of it may be true, and some of it may not be. But it's hard to distinguish fact from fiction.
Well, and again, just enough to mix it up a little bit, Alan. To get people thinking, or maybe people saw something, and
controversy. Just keeping the controversy going.
It is. All right, everybody, welcome back to Fringe Radio for Saturday night. Alan, we were talking a little bit before the break about, possibly what may be, disinformation and what, reality and fiction and science fiction and just a lot of things thrown out there to kind of stir the pot up. But I do find it interesting. Last week on the show I had Nicole Willett on from the Mars Society. We had her on for an hour, and of course we talked about going to Mars, and it's kind of interesting when we talk about triangular crafts and potentially spaceships that could carry people, around the Earth and different federations, almost Star Trek, Star Wars stuff. And yet it is a monumental effort to get humans from here to Mars. But, you wonder, is that really the truth? Is that what really is going on, that we're way, way behind the lines? We're way behind the scene, or not behind the times? And, or is that a big facade, Well,
there's no way to prove it, see, but when you put all of this information together, it certainly sounds like a very good possibility. And, these are the things I'm bringing out in the book. We may already have a base on the moon and also on Mars. There's been a lot of allegations about it, but how can you prove it? Is it part of a government black budget project, or do we really have a space fleet in orbit called Solar Warden? And if we do, what's its primary function? What's its mission? I mean, is it to protect our country against missiles from another country being, launched from another country, or is it to protect the Earth against an invasion from unfriendly aliens, or if it has these capabilities, could it also protect us from a large asteroid impact?
Sure.
When you look at the Chelyabinsk asteroid, that was on February 2013. The asteroid had entered the Earth's atmosphere and exploded about 15 miles above the town of Chelyabinsk over in Russia. And the shock wave it created, it damaged a lot of buildings, broke all the windows in all the buildings. 1,000 people were injured. Right. If it hit the ground, I mean, it would have been devastating. But it was captured by several people on video footage. And one video in particular showed something rather startling. It appears, something just came from behind the asteroid at a tremendous speed and flew right through it just before it exploded. And that made me wonder, was it prevented from reaching the surface and causing major destruction by a missile that was maybe fired from this Solar Warden fleet that we have in orbit, or allegedly have in orbit? I mean, there's one planetary scientist, his name is Kevin Grazier, who disputes the idea because he says when the asteroid hit the atmosphere, it started to disintegrate, and he contends that the denser atmosphere slowed it down, but the fragments that broke off were much lighter in volume and weight, and they didn't slow down as much, and he claims that one piece just sped past the asteroid. Of course, it's possible, it's true,
Sure,
but
sure.
I'm not really convinced about that because the reason I question it is the speed at which this object was traveling and that it came from behind the asteroid. And it just doesn't seem possible that a piece broke off and fell way behind the asteroid, then accelerated to such an incredible speed and passed through it, or maybe passed by it. But it appears it exited the front of the craft, and it pushed some of its inner material out with it that fell away. But the object, this thing, it just continued on at the same speed at which it entered the asteroid, and that seriously makes me wonder if it really was some kind of a missile.
Yeah.
And I looked at this thing 100 times, at the video clip of this thing, and I, it just seems too incredible. This thing was traveling way too fast. It didn't come from around it came from way behind the asteroid. It just seemed to pass right through it and push out some stuff on the front, but it kept on going. It's just amazing. So, the more the more you see things like this and read other information. I mean, video is, it's worth 1,000 words.
Right.
And when you put all this information together, it really makes you wonder if we do have something out there in orbit.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that meteor strike in Russia, if that wasn't eye-opening with all that video, to see how one of these things could literally appear out of nowhere and seconds later, I mean, it was absolutely amazing how fast that happened. If that would have been a several mile wide meteor, it would have. It would have changed. We probably wouldn't be talking here right now. I mean, it might have changed.
For sure.
And it was just what was amazing to me was, again, how this thing, it just came out of nowhere, with no warning, no nothing. There it was, and matter of fact, you wouldn't even have the old proverbial, grab your behind. You wouldn't even have time to do that.
Yeah, for sure. Oh God, that would have been devastating if it hit. But somehow something prevented it from hitting. It exploded, and the reason why it exploded, well, when you look at the video, I assume that you've seen it. It's just amazing. This thing just shot from nowhere, come out of nowhere. It went right through it. It just appeared to go right through it. So you got to wonder, geez, is what McKinnon claimed is true? Do we really have something like that out there? And from talking, this conversation I had back in the '60s with a friend of my boss in the music store there, Jesus, and what he said. I never thought much about it until, after I started getting into this stuff. And I said, geez, if we had such incredible advanced technology back then, what have we developed since then? And,
right.
It's very possible that this solar warden does exist, but of course there's no way to prove it. It's something the government is just sitting on top of, and we'll never know. But if it ever is made public, like I said, a lot of people would be awful PO'd at the government for keeping that technology secret when they could have saved the lives of these astronauts killed in the shuttle disasters. So,
well, and the other thing is what I find interesting, and again, I'm not. I think we're both the same when it comes to this, Alan. Is I'm not a skeptic, but I am skeptical on certain things. But the one thing that blows my mind is Curiosity is sending back photos from Mars. And, of course, there's some people that are seeing things. The mind can play a lot of tricks. The eyes can play a lot of tricks. But there's stuff coming back that anybody can go out and take a look at online that appear to be man-made type objects that this thing is coming across. Now, they appear to have been there for a long, long time. But perfectly square shapes, stuff that looks like machinery of sorts. Even with the moon, some people say, well, it's just a shadow, and it's just this, and it's just that. And, astronauts, Buzz Aldrin, several of them said, there were ships with the lights on these mountain ranges.
Yeah.
These astronauts have come out and said this. There was something there, way back when. But yet a lot of people still want to refute it and don't want to even go into it.
Yeah, because it can't be proved. That's the only thing.
You cut out, Alan.
Sorry. It said mainly because there's really no way to corroborate that information.
Right.
But when you get at people like astronauts making these claims, and you really have to wonder, what's the odds are that they're lying? Chances are what they're saying is the truth, and why would they? Look at the late Ed Mitchell. He just passed away not too long ago. I mean, I have an excerpt of his. I actually have it on a video of the recording, a TV interview that he gave over the phone, where he admitted he had talked to many government and military officials from different countries that acknowledged their involvement with alien technology. And he came out and said, the Roswell thing was real. It really happened, and we recovered a craft and debris from that crash site. So, why would he be lying?
Yeah.
So you got all of this stuff. When you put it all together, there's too many credible people with good information that you can't dispute. Look at what was the former defense minister of Canada there? What was his name? The Honorable Paul Hellyer.
Paul Hellyer.
At the disclosure meeting, he come out and said, he's one of the people that testified, and he said, he was told a general from the United States confided in him that the U.S. officials are in contact with alien races. So and how can you dispute? Somebody like him, why would he come out and lie about something like that? So obviously the government is covering up something, or covering up a lot of stuff.
Well, and when you think about it, it's pretty. If you want to put it in really simple terms, I believe myself that we have a lot of technology out there in the medical field. I personally believe that there are cures for terrible diseases like cancer. Maybe not all of them, but I believe there are cures. I believe there are cures for obesity. I think there's a lot of things that are available that are out there. But at the end of the day, if they had that magic diet pill, Alan, where you could take it and let's say, eat normal, whatever you want to call that is, for the next 6 months and lose all the weight you could ever want. Imagine what would happen to the diet soda industry, the diet the diet industry, or what would happen to big pharmaceutical. These are billion and billion and billion and billions of dollars industries that there wouldn't be a need for anymore, and that's just not going to happen. I'm sorry.
No,
but
Eisenhower warned us about that when he was leaving office. He says, "Be careful. Don't let the military-industrial complex take over." And
right.
that would include even the pharmaceutical industries. So it's big business that's running the show right now, and the industrial complex, because how can they get away with so much of this stuff? It's just unbelievable. And I think the pharmaceutical industry is way ahead of what we know of.
Oh, sure. I totally believe that.
Like free energy would put the petroleum companies out of business, just like a cure for cancer would put a lot of or other diseases will put the pharmaceutical companies out of business. They wouldn't be making all this money that they're incredible amounts of money and profits that they're making off of sick people. It's a crime.
It is. It is, and I believe a lot of that. There are a lot of cures out there, and it's. But again, I just don't know. Like you've said, to come forth with a lot of this stuff, it would probably throw things upside down and turn everything upside down from people's belief in government and what laws are and what laws aren't and what religions are and religious beliefs aren't. And it would, I could see it being just very, very, very chaotic with everybody asking the same one-word question, why? You know.
When it comes to the religious community, if they were to come out and announce, we retrieved some crashed UFOs and alien bodies and blah, 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 I don't think that would turn the world upside down.
No, I don't either.
Even in the religious community. It has to be something more than that. It's just if they released the information, they knew what was going on between aliens and these biblical characters in the Bible. I mean, that would shatter a lot of people's beliefs. I mean, they would lose faith in everything they believed in as far as the tenets of the religion. If they found out it was an extraterrestrial sham, I mean, that would be devastating.
It would.
It's mind-boggling when you really get into it.
It is.
Look at all of the details. Well, you read, from Adam to Omega, you read the biblical section there.
I did.
And if any of that is true, which I'm not claiming it is, but when you look at it from a logical perspective, it makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
But again, if that were to be released, my God, I can just imagine. You think you got religious problems in the world now, you'd have 100 times worse. Yeah.
Alan, we've got to wrap up. The 2 hours went way too quick, as always.
Yep.
And, I want to thank you for giving up time on your Saturday night and making time for us. And I want a copy of the new book, and then I want to schedule an interview with you as soon as you get it out, because I can't wait to get my hands on it and read it. I've read the first book from cover to cover, and it's amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I will keep in touch. And the minute it comes out, I'll make sure you get a copy. So.
All right, my friend. Well, I got to wrap it up real quick. A.R. Roberts, again, his current book is out called From Adam to Omega, An Anatomy of UFO Phenomena. The new book will be out soon. We'll keep our listeners abreast. Thank you so much, my friend, and let's stay in touch.
Okay, Pat, you take care. Have a good night.
Good night.